Hi guys, I hope you are all good. Today we are going to be reading the first part of chapter 4 of our book, Tiger Wars by the wonderful Steve Backshall. As the words fell from his lips, the black-clad man reached for the collars of the chargers and sprinted towards their goal like the hounds of hell unleashed. Saker stopped, turned, and stood his ground. There was no sense in running now. Taking his tunic from around his neck, he wrapped it around his forearm. He could at least take one dog on his arm and maybe wrestle it to the ground before they all fell upon him. But then there was a new noise, a nostalgic tooting like something from an old Western movie. Cinta couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. The old train line that ran through the fields to one side of her road only had a train trundle down it about once a week. So for one to come along by now was the most bizarre twist of fate, or fortune. But then as she looked towards the charging dogs, she suddenly had a cold feeling tickle down the back of her neck. "Listen to me," Saker said. "These dogs don't know the difference between me and you. They're just trained to kill. Either you run with me or you take your chances with them." She had less than a second to make up her mind, and when Saker tugged her into the field, Cinta didn't resist. In fact, she almost overtook him as they raced towards the train. It was an old-fashioned steam train, churning gobbets of black smoke from the smokestack of its engine. The front few carriages crammed full of people, sweet meat vendors and passengers hanging out of every carriage. The rear two carriages were open-sided stock cars with sliding doors. As they sprinted towards the tracks, Cinta could see the shadowy faces of stowaways inside. Suddenly, there was an excited yip behind them as the dogs drew closer. She didn't dare look back. They reached the doorway of the last stock car as it threatened to trundle past. Though the train looked as if it was going at a snail's pace, that was misleading, and it was actually travelling at quite a lick. Cinta couldn't believe what was happening. They were trying to jump on a moving train. Saker went first, leaping onto the wooden floorboards inside the stock car, holding the top of his body over into the car, then swinging his legs up to follow. He immediately turned to help Cinta, but the train was going too fast. She couldn't catch it. She wasn't tall enough to make the leap that he had. Cinta stumbled, felt the hot breaths of the dogs on her neck, and the brutal grip took the back of her shirt collar and tugged her off her feet. A pair of jaws snapped shut with a horrifying click behind her as Cinta found herself sprawling on the floor of the stock car. The dogs kept pacing around the train, barking furiously and leaping at the open side, the Doberman even managing to catch hold of the side and struggling to get on board, but slipping back down with a yelp. As the tireless train slowly left the dogs behind, Cinta looked up through teary eyes and sobs at Saker, who had just certainly saved her life. He was standing in the doorway staring back down the tracks. "So what now?" she sobbed. "You're kidnapping me. Where are you taking me, and what are you going to do with me?" She said it as much for the ears of the silent stowaways sitting in the half-light who hadn't commented on the invasion of their hiding place. They were thin, drawn men, possibly beggars, unlikely to be of any use to her, but somehow she wanted them to hear her anyway. "You go free now," Saker responded impassively. "Next time this train stops, you can get off. Well, or you could always hop off now, if you're feeling brave." She looked at the fields rushing by outside the stock car. She wasn't feeling that brave. "Who are you, and why are they chasing you?" She stopped and chose her words carefully. "Are you on the run from the police?" "Did they look like police to you?" He had a point there. Indian police wore blue uniforms, never have attack dogs, at least not out here they didn't. And they were always, well, Indian. Saker sat down with his back against the sliding door, knees pulled up to his chest, and scratched his head with both hands. He dropped his chin. For the first time since she'd met him, he didn't look so tough. and I'd really like to answer your first question, but I don't exactly know who I am." Sinta looked at him with new interest. "What do you mean?" Sinta breathed in deeply and closed his eyes. Seika breathed in deeply and closed his eyes. He was clearly making up his mind about something. Then he let the breath go. Maybe it would help to just get it off his chest. Perhaps talking about it would help him find some sense in the insanity. And what harm could it do to tell this girl? He didn't intend to be in her company much longer. "The only clear memories I have of the last, hour or so, I woke up in a forest with a beat-up guy at my feet and my head bleeding. I'm pretty sure it was me who beat him up. I'm being chased by some seriously scary people, and I have no idea why, but I seem to know loads about staying alive and fighting, though I don't know how. I know that this has something to do with it, though." He rolled up his trouser leg to reveal his tattoo. "What's that?" "It's a Seika falcon. Superb hunters, keen eyesight. They hunt their prey by chasing them down in flat-out flight. I think this is me. Well, I think it's my name." It was the craziest thing Sinta had ever heard. "So you expect me to believe that you've got amnesia, that you've forgotten who you are? You snatched me from my home, dragged me for miles, you hurt Tariq, you are a crook, a poacher, you're just a coward who can't stand what he really is." "Yeah, maybe. Maybe when I find out what I am, I won't like it much. But until I figured it out, you can do us both a favour and keep your mouth shut." Seika suddenly became aware of an insistent growling in his stomach. When mammals are in fight or flight mode, blood is channeling away from the stomach and other parts of the body and taken to the muscles, the heart, the lungs and the brain, parts where it's most needed. Seika knew that some animals, even people, will spontaneously wee themselves when they're frightened. It might seem gross, but he'd learnt that it served a real purpose, helping to empty the bladder of waste material, to make a person lighter and make running easier, even to make themselves more unpalatable to predators. However, now that Seika was no longer fleeing, he was very aware that he hadn't eaten for ages and had consumed an awful lot of energy in running away. He was starving. "Have you got any money?" he demanded of Sinta. She shook her head, but before she could stop him, he'd stuck his hand into her jean pockets. There wasn't much, just a few 100 rupees. Seika caught the attention of the small boy who was staring at them both with huge eyes from the gloom. He waved the money and made the universal gesture of pinched hands to mouth that says, "I want food." The boy hesitated a second, then grabbed the cash and swung out of the carriage door. "That's great," Sinta shouted. "We'll never see that again. That was all I had." "We'll see," replied Seika confidently. No more than 5 minutes later, the boy swung back into the carriage with a handful of green oranges, a bag of peanuts fried in their shells, and some floury chapatis. Seika nodded, handed the boy a 15 rupee note, and tucked into the food as if he'd never eaten before. Shows how much you know," he said to Sinta between mouthfuls of chapati. "This is supposed to be your country too." "Am I going to get any of that?" she asked. "It was my money." Seika stopped mid-mouthful, as if hit by a thought that he'd simply never had before. He looked at the small haul in his lap as if it were causing him physical pain, and handed over an orange and a chapati. Sinta was going to retort sarcastically, but stopped herself. She didn't know when she'd next get the chance to eat. When the food was finished, Seika took his damp tunic from around his wrist and squeezed out the last drops of water and pulled it on over his head. As he rolled it down to his waistband, he noticed the plaster again. Plucking at the corner, he peeled the plaster away to reveal nothing. Nothing at all. The plaster wasn't covering any cut, wound, or mark of any kind. That was peculiar. He ran his fingers through his hair, and his fingernails caught on the jagged edges of his head wound, making him flinch. "That needs stitching," said Cinta matter-of-factly. A cut like that will get infected out here almost instantly. Seika rounded on her. When I want your comments, Florence Nightingale, I'll ask for them. Cinta was affronted and not sure why she had cared in the first place. Outside it was starting to get dark and the train was heading into the mountains. It would be chilly with the wind rushing through the carriage. Seika picked up a dusty Hessian rice sack from the floor and wrapped it around his shoulders, glancing down at Cinta, who was already beginning to shiver a little. He took another and offered it to her. She grimaced at him defiantly, but the cold got the better of her and she took the sack and turned it into a shawl. Cinta's privileged upbringing had never really taken her away from the few other estates close to her father's. With every minute she was getting further and further from her own world, away from Papaget and her governess, away from everything familiar. Looking at Seika, she saw a boy lost in thought, yet obviously still fiercely attentive to everything going on around him. He must surely have been exhausted, ready to collapse, yet his eyes didn't flutter and his head never lolled, even slightly with sleep. Instead, he stared into the darkness beyond the carriages with dark, wide-open eyes like a hawk. She shuddered beneath her rice-sack shawl, and this time not only from the cold. Right, and that is the end of the first part. Tomorrow I will be back with the second part of chapter 4. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you all soon. Be kind to each other and be good. I miss you all. Can't wait to get back to school. Take care. Bye.